Shalom friends, Aaron here. Going to share some more thoughts about masks. It's not the only thing I think about, of course, but I wanted to touch base on something, and it'll take me into a couple of little tangents. I'm not going to talk about all the other ridiculous things that I would like to make a video talking about, but because I feel it's important to share that the masks are not safe. You are simply being lied to. That's a fact. And I couldn't stress this enough. Turn your TV off. Stop soaking in all the fear of protests and anarchy, which just means no rulers, by the way. That's all that means. It doesn't mean anything about chaos. Nothing. That's a word that's been hijacked and used to mean something that it doesn't mean. Stop watching the TV and thinking everybody's going to drop dead and die and it's all this horrible stuff. And, oh God, college football is being canceled. And just shut the TV off. Shut the TV off and do some research for yourself. And we're going to touch base about that. How we're being told now, don't do your own research. But I'm not going to do that in this video. Television is propaganda. It's propaganda. That's all it is. It's getting you prepared for the coming reality. I mean, that's absolutely what it is. If you can't break the addiction, because it is an addiction, and get rid of the television, frankly, I think you're doomed. I really do. You can afford to buy yourself meters, an oxygen meter, a carbon dioxide meter, a handful of masks that you don't own, and test this out for yourself and find out what you think. A few cable bills, sell your TV. Get rid of the damn thing. What do you need it for? The media companies are not your friends. The government is not your friend. The government, on the most benign level, is bought and paid for by corporate interests. And yeah, most of the people who work in the corporations probably don't really know what's going on, or probably, relatively decent people, but the people at the top are anything but, and that's a fact. If we still have to talk about this stuff and you don't believe it, I don't know what to say. But this is about how in just this past month, in July of 2020, OSHA added some things to their website talking about masks, and they directly relate to, they're directly correlating with the videos that I did showing the scary oxygen levels and CO2 levels that I found under masks. And just to reiterate, if you've not seen the video, the one that I did doing both, every mask that I've put on my face, every single one, including ones that are mesh masks, not fully tight around the face with two strings, but just at the top around the ears, every single one, I get oxygen levels that drop below 19.5%, and every single one I get carbon dioxide levels that shoot past 10,000 parts per million. So I'm just going to read this and then I'm going to talk about it. This is on OSHA's webpage now, and it was not on there before. They've got questions in here because of COVID, and they're kind of clarifying, they say, some things about mask wearing. So here's one of the questions that's posed and then their answer. Does wearing a medical/surgical mask or a cloth face covering, let's just say any cloth face covering. Apparently they've tested every different kind of cloth you could possibly use. You could put a freaking quilt on your face. I know that's not what they mean, but what do they mean? Does wearing a mask or a face covering cause unsafe oxygen levels or harmful carbon dioxide levels to the wearer? No, period. Medical masks, including surgical masks, are routinely worn by healthcare workers throughout the day as part of their PPE ensembles, and do not compromise their oxygen levels or cause carbon dioxide buildup. Listen, I have testimony, person-to-person testimony from nurses that after wearing the thing all day, they won't wear it anywhere else. They're feeling lightheaded, they're feeling sick, and they wouldn't normally wear the mask all day long. Not before COVID. They didn't wear the mask all day long. And that's nonsense. And I've already talked about the fact that in OR rooms, which is what they started talking about and why the masks are safe, that in the OR rooms, that the facility is maintaining a totally different standard of air inside that room. They're getting, I think it was 15 air changes per hour, completely changing out the air. Only 1/3 of that air being outside air, which is cleaned. And I haven't been able to verify this, but they may actually take the CO2 out. If they don't, only 1/3 of the air coming in has any CO2 in it at all. The rest of it's clean and oxygen air that doesn't have carbon dioxide in it at all. And if it does, the levels are really low. So 15 air changes per hour. So that means that the carbon dioxide that's being breathed out, the gas that's been used to put the person to sleep, all that stuff is getting pulled out. And then they actually maintain a higher oxygen level, closer to 22.5%, instead of 21%, closer to 22% is what it was, about 1% higher. And that's significant. 1% oxygen makes a huge difference. And I also found some pretty interesting blog posts I shared about, not blog posts, it was surveys that a number of doctors were given, surgeons, about whether or not they would even wear a mask in the OR if they had the opportunity not to. And an overwhelming majority of them said they wouldn't. And there were some reasons for that, and part of that was that a lot of people said they couldn't breathe well in them. So there's that. So routinely worn throughout the day. What does that mean? Like putting them on and off throughout the day? Not until now have people generally worn masks all day. And they're saying that it does not compromise oxygen levels or cause carbon dioxide buildup. Well, we're talking about the standards that OSHA gives, and they're going to go on here at the end and tell you how these standards don't apply to mask wearing, but they do apply to, anything else, which is nonsense. But just to reiterate, if you don't have 19.5% oxygen, if it's below that, OSHA considers that to be an oxygen-deprived environment and immediately harmful to health and life. Period. That's what they say. And OSHA's standard, the highest level of carbon dioxide that you're supposed to be breathing in on a weighted average throughout the day is 5,000 parts per million. I'm going to talk a little bit about those numbers again. Masks are designed to be breathed through and can protect against respiratory droplets, which are typically much larger than tiny carbon dioxide particles. Consequently, most carbon dioxide particles will either go through the mask or escape along the mask's loose-fitting perimeter. Some carbon dioxide might collect between the mask and the wearer's face, but not at unsafe levels. I'm going to stop. It's just 3 paragraphs, and I'm going to talk about carbon dioxide buildup. I'm going to talk about it because this is nonsense. This is literal nonsense. You can find out about carbon dioxide and what it does to the rest of the molecules that are in your air. If you want to look into whether or not carbon dioxide levels in the mask are unsafe, the algorithms on any of your search engines, Yahoo, Bing, Google, whatever, are going to steer you to all sorts of bullcrap articles and websites and blog posts about how the masks are totally safe. But if you can just think a little, which frankly, if you're watching TV, I'm not sure you can think anymore, but your brain can recover. Your brain can recover. You can smoke for 20 years, stop smoking, and your lungs heal. You can watch that friggin' I'm pointing where the television would be. I don't own one. You could watch your television all this time and get rid of the damn thing. Stop watching it, and your brain can heal, and your ability to reason can come back. It's possible. Anyway, this stuff is not true, and if you can think about how to find the answers other than asking the question the way that they're looking for you to ask the question, you can find the answer they don't want you to see. I could take everything out of my 2-car garage. I could take one of those little, portable fire pits, and I could start a fire in my garage. I could open my 2 garage doors. I'm talking about my roll-up doors. I could open my man door and open my windows. I could take a small canister CO2 fire extinguisher. There's nothing in it but CO2. And I can turn that thing on and point it toward that fire, and the fire will go out. not because of wind, but because the carbon dioxide is that much more dense than all of the air, including the oxygen, that it will displace it. It will push it out of the way to put the fire out. Now, of course, let's say we have all the doors and windows shut. That carbon dioxide that came out of that canister, that's 100% CO2, is going to dissipate. It's going to mix up in the air. And I'll tell you, the CO2 meter that I have isn't the most amazing one. But if I was in my garage and I measured my CO2 levels and then I emptied a small canister from a CO2 fire extinguisher into my garage, I could measure the parts per million being higher. Once it all dissipated, it'd be no problem. I'd measure it easily. I could go around the room. I could go right where I put the fire out and measure it and see if it's higher, go to the corner of the room and see that it's a little bit higher. It's very sensitive. It picks those things up. Why does that work? The atomic weight of carbon dioxide is heavier. It's a lot heavier than nitrogen. It's heavier than argon. It's heavier than helium. Almost positive it's heavier than argon. I never did look that up. But argon's 1% of the ambient air. The other trace gases, helium, hydrogen, it's obviously heavier than that. It displaces that air. And if it displaces oxygen, 21% thereabouts in our ambient air, it displaces the nitrogen, which is like half as heavy as the oxygen that's making up 78% of our air. And I found a number of other ways to look into this, like for storing food for long-term storage to prepare your food. If you're going to take something you want to store, some dry goods or something, and you don't want it to go bad, stale, mold, whatever, put it in a 5-gallon bucket. If you had a canister with CO2 and you just held the hose over the bucket, not in the bucket, over the bucket, and turned it on, the carbon dioxide, being as dense as it is going to go straight down. It'll eventually dissipate, but that takes time. That does not happen immediately. It will sink down into the bucket. It's that much heavier than the ambient air. It's like any experiment you've ever seen where you take different density liquids that are all set up as different colors, and you take a glass vial and you dump them all in there and you shake it up and you watch, and they all settle out at perfectly even levels. Like the carbon dioxide will settle down into that 5-gallon bucket and it will push all of the air out, and you don't have to be in a huge hurry. It's not like vacuum sealing. You can go get your lid for your bucket and carefully put your lid on, and the air will not have gotten back in there, the oxygen, because it takes a while for the carbon dioxide to come out. And I found a video from years ago, a guy was showing you how you can use CO2 for your food storage. And he did this awesome little experiment, and that led me to look for others, and I found others that universities were doing just to show the density differences in gases. So this is a reality that you can go find if you're not looking for COVID and masks and CO2, because then it's hidden from you by the algorithm, of course. And all of the garbage, nonsense, propaganda, news that's put out there tells you that they're safe, and so you're not going to find this information. I'm telling you, think. Guy takes a glass jar. He puts a little tea candle in there on top of another tea candle upside down, just so it's sitting off the bottom. He takes his CO2 canister. He fills up a glass pitcher, just puts the hose in there, turns it on, waits about 10 seconds, shuts it off. He knows it's full of carbon dioxide because it's pushed all of the other air out. And then he takes the pitcher, and with this jar with a lit candle burning just fine, he now pours the pitcher over the glass jar. Can't see it. Candle goes out. That is the way it works. And every time we exhale, we're breathing out 30 to 40,000 parts per million of CO2. If you live in the city and you've got really bad air, you might be seeing about 650 parts per million. That's bad air. That's unhealthy air. If it gets up in the neighborhood of 900, they're giving you warnings about your air quality. But we're not talking about 800 or 900, really bad air quality warning kind of air. People who have breathing problems shouldn't go outside. I'm gonna just look something up here while I'm talking. We're talking about 30 to 40,000 parts per million. And that is what we're breathing out every time we exhale. Let's just say it's 30,000 parts per million. Yes, of course, whatever mask you're wearing, even if I cup my hands over my face tightly, I've got spaces, it's not tight to my face. I didn't glue my hands on here. So of course the CO2 is going to get out. But I've done this and tested it with the meter. And it gets up to 10,000 parts per million. That's as far as my meter will measure. And that's a telling point. Any meter that I can find that's meant to measure the air quality, whether or not your air is safe, that will alarm and tell you your air is not safe, is either set up for 5,000 parts per million, because that is OSHA's limit for your weighted average in an 8-hour workday. So if you measure it throughout the day, the weighted average has to be below 5,000 parts per million. And the most they'll measure is 10,000 parts per million. And it's for very specific situations where you're trying to have high CO2 levels for, I don't know, fermenting something, that you can get these meters that will measure beyond 10,000 parts per million. I would love to own one of those. I'm not going to spend $400 to $600 on one. But all of the masks that I have tested, every single one, I get measurements that go within the minute right over 10,000 parts per million, period. OSHA tells you that 5,000 parts per million, weighted average for your day, is too high. For other situations, not masks, which we're going to read about. So it's okay if you're in a confined space. It's not okay if you're in a confined space. If you're in a tank or something, or a cave, it's not okay if your average is above 5,000 parts per million. But it's okay inside the mask. You're breathing out 30,000 parts per million. That's 3%. That doesn't sound like a lot, but carbon dioxide is dangerous. And we're breathing in like 0.4, 5, 6% carbon dioxide normally. If you're inside and your air is not good, maybe it's like 2,000 parts per million. That's bad air. That's not good air. That's not healthy for you. You can have headaches. You can have like memory issues. You know, it's not good. That's, 0.2%. But we're talking about a full 3 or 4% that you're breathing out. And it's displacing the oxygen and nitrogen that you're pulling in. It's displacing it. It's harder for the oxygen and nitrogen to get in because of that dense air. That's just the way that works. Let me just look this up. Air quality. I'm going to have to look longer for this, and I'm not going to bother because that's not what this video is about. It would be helpful to add that in there, but I looked it up. I didn't bookmark it. I'll talk about that later maybe. So back to OSHA, telling you that carbon dioxide might collect between the mask and the wearer's face, but not at unsafe levels. Well, what do they consider unsafe levels? They consider 5,000 parts per million unsafe, depending on the situation. And I'm telling you, I know it because I've done it dozens of times with so many different masks in so many different places in different ways, walking, sitting, exerting myself a little, just walking, not really exerting myself, sitting still, sitting where it's like in a kind of confined space, sitting where there's a breeze. I always get over 10,000 parts per million. Always. So, to say that it can't build up at unsafe levels, if 10,000 parts per million is an unsafe level, then that's false. And OSHA tells you in certain circumstances, in every circumstance other than with a mask, 5,000 parts per million is unsafe. And over that, more and more and more unsafe. And what are we really breathing in? My masks within a minute go past 10,000 parts per million. What do I have under there? 20,000 parts per million? That's scary. Like medical masks, cloth face coverings are loose fitting with no seal and are designed to be breathed through. In addition, workers may easily remove their medical masks or cloth face coverings periodically, and of course when not in close proximity to others, to eliminate any negligible buildup of carbon dioxide. Look, negligible. I always test my ambient air, whether I'm inside or outside, before I do a mask test, and I've done dozens of them. Going from 450 or 600-ish, outside I've seen 450 to like 580. And then inside, depending on where I've been in a vehicle, which your CO2 level will be higher in your car. Even if the air conditioning's on and you're recirculating, it gets pretty high in there. It feels nice in there, but your CO2 is building up. Inside where, our air wasn't really great, over 1,000 parts per million. Let's say you go to 1,000 parts per million, which isn't great air. That's like kind of the top end of like, okay interior air, indoor air. So you're talking about 1%. So going from 1%, or 0.1%, I'm sorry, going from 0.1% all the way up to what would be 1 full percent. I mean, to call that negligible, I mean, when we're talking about carbon dioxide, you get to 80,000 parts per million, you get to 8%, and you're gonna die. That's gonna kill you. 40, 50, like you're really in a dangerous place. So when we're talking about 3%, and that doesn't sound like a lot, 8%, you're dead. 5%, if you don't get out of that environment, you're gonna pass out. So 3% is a big deal. And going from 0.1% or 0.04 or 5% to beyond 1% under the mask, to call that negligible is nonsense. So they're saying how, well, you can just pull your mask down to let out some of that negligible buildup. I don't call that negligible, and only an idiot would, frankly. And then they go on to say that some people have mistakenly claimed that OSHA standards, and they give you some examples. I won't tell you all of them. One of them, though, is the respiratory protection standard, which I referenced. I have referenced this in my video that I did about masks. They have said some people mistakenly claim that OSHA standards like the respiratory protection standard apply to the issue of carbon or dioxide levels resulting from the use of medical masks or cloth face coverings in work settings with normal ambient air, like healthcare settings, offices, retail settings, blah, blah, blah. These standards do not apply to the wearing of medical masks or cloth face coverings in work settings with normal ambient air. These standards would only apply to work settings where there are known or suspected sources of chemicals, or where workers are required to enter a potentially dangerous location, like a large tank or a vessel. But I want to make this clear. OSHA says not just because other dangerous chemicals or gases could be present. They make it clear that if you have less than 19.5% oxygen, that they consider that to be an oxygen-deprived environment. They'll go on to talk about how other gases could be present, and that could be an additional danger, but they're making it clear in their standards, which they're telling you don't apply to mask wearing. They're making it clear that if you have less than 19.5% oxygen available to breathe, that is an oxygen-deprived environment, and it is immediately dangerous to life and health. That's their words from their standard. They also tell you that if you're in an environment where you're going to be breathing in elevated levels of CO2, your weighted average limit for an 8-hour workday is 5,000 parts per million. Why? Because above that is not good for you. And I'm not going to go into all of that stuff, that I talked about, the health effects. And I've learned a lot more about it. So they're just coming out and tell you that they're safe. It's not true. Carbon dioxide is heavier than the rest of the gas. It displaces those gases. You're breathing in, you're breathing out. You're breathing in, you're breathing out. And every time you breathe out, you're breathing out 30,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide that will put out a fire where there is plenty of oxygen all around the space where you're applying that carbon dioxide. It is getting hot and warm inside my hands. There is a lot of CO2 building up inside here. There is a lot of CO2 building up inside here. And if I stop breathing, which is I think what they want us to do, if you stop breathing, the CO2 will all leak out magically around those little spaces. But if you keep breathing and keep pumping out 3 or 4% CO2 into that space, it's going to continue to displace the oxygen, the nitrogen, and the whatever else is in there. And you're going to breathe in more and more CO2, and you are going to become acidic, and you are going to have all sorts of problems. Period. Period. Mask wearing is not benign. It is not without risk. That's bullshit. Period. This is nonsense. So I'm going to leave it there. I just wanted to make a video talking about this bull crap because that's what it is. I've got a couple other things to cover, so I'm going to make another video. But until next time, think for yourselves. Think for yourselves. I mean, for God's sake, for your sake, for your family's sake. Think for yourselves. Stop letting the friggin' idiot flat screen think for you. Get rid of the damn thing. It is propaganda. You watch that thing and it shuts off your critical thinking. That's the way it affects you, period. The patents say so. There have been studies that have said that if you lay in a dark, quiet room, you use more energy then because you're thinking than you use if you watch TV. And they tell you over and over and over and over and over again this nonsense. It is the theater of the absurd and people believe it. Get rid of the friggin' TV. Think for yourself. I'm telling you that you can buy your own meter. Get rid of your frickin' cable bill. Buy your own meters. Test it for yourself and decide if you're going to wear a mask. You can fight this if you want to, if you know that it matters. And I'm telling you, for me, I don't want to fight with anybody about anything. I'm a peacemaker. But I'm not going to wear a mask, and I don't wear a mask. I'm not going to, period. I'm not doing it because I know that it's harmful for me. I know it for me, not because these jackasses tell me that it's safe or unsafe. They're lying when they tell you that it's safe. It isn't safe. They know it's not safe at the top, but they can't say so. The truth is stifled everywhere we go. The truth is hate speech. The truth is evil today. Don't think for yourself. No, that's not what they want you to do. And in my next video, I'm going to touch base on some things some other people have talked about. But if you haven't seen it, you need to hear about it. Anyway, until next time, I'm just begging you to think for yourself. Think for yourself and your loved ones. Take your life and health into your own hands. Until next time.